Most people think the Alcatraz escape was about bravery. Some think it was about intelligence. Others think it was luck. But what if the real reason it worked, or at least came closer than any escape in American prison history, had nothing to do with courage at all? What if it was about patience? Not the inspirational kind. Not the stay positive kind, but the dangerous kind. The kind of patience that grows quietly inside systems that stop paying attention. Because Alcatraz didn't fail in one dramatic moment. It failed slowly, silently, over years. And the men who escaped or disappeared didn't beat the prison with strength. They waited it out. Today, we're not just retelling an escape story. We're pulling it apart. We're looking at what actually broke inside the most secure prison in America, and why no amount of concrete, cold water, or armed guards could stop it. And by the end, you may realize this wasn't just a prison break. It was a lesson about what happens when institutions confuse reputation with reality. Alcatraz wasn't designed to be perfect, just feared. Alcatraz didn't become famous because it was the most secure prison ever built. It became famous because people believed it was. That belief did most of the work. Located over a mile from San Francisco, surrounded by freezing water and unpredictable currents, the prison didn't rely solely on bars and walls. It relied on psychology. The message was simple: you don't escape here. And for decades, that message worked. Not because no one tried, but because everyone assumed trying was pointless. That assumption was Alcatraz's greatest defense, and eventually, its greatest weakness. Because when something is labeled inescapable, people stop looking for cracks. Guards become comfortable. Systems grow rigid. Maintenance becomes routine instead of careful. Nothing screams danger. And that's exactly when danger grows. The prison didn't expect creativity. It expected obedience. Alcatraz was designed for rule breakers who couldn't follow rules. What it didn't expect were inmates who studied rules. Men who didn't rush. Men who watched patterns. Men who understood that systems don't fail loudly, they fail quietly, one overlooked detail at a time. Frank Morris wasn't the loudest man in the prison. The Anglin brothers weren't the strongest. Allen West wasn't the boldest. But they all shared something dangerous. They paid attention. They noticed that maintenance was rushed, that concrete crumbled. That noise blended into routine, that guards stopped questioning requests that sounded reasonable. And most importantly, they noticed time. Because time is the one thing prisons give inmates more of than anything else. The escape didn't start with a plan. It started with observation. Hollywood loves to show prison escapes beginning with a sudden idea. That's not what happened here. This escape began with watching dust fall from a wall, with noticing that a vent wasn't sealed properly, with understanding that when something breaks slowly, nobody notices it breaking at all. The men didn't attack the prison. They studied it. They learned when guards listened, and when they didn't. They learned when noise mattered, and when it disappeared. They learned which rules were enforced, and which were ceremonial. And this is where most retellings get it wrong. The escape wasn't about digging. It was about timing. Why slow plans beat smart ones? Anyone can come up with a clever idea. Very few people can wait long enough to execute one. The men didn't rush. They drilled tiny holes not to escape, but to weaken. They didn't remove walls. They perforated them. That's an important distinction. Because removing something draws attention. Weakening it doesn't. Every spoon scrape, every minute of drilling, every tiny crack was hidden inside noise that already existed. Music, movement, routine. The prison didn't hear escape. It heard normal. And normal is invisible. Deception wasn't a trick. It was a delay. The dummy heads weren't there to fool guards forever. They were there to buy time. That's it. One extra hour. One delayed reaction. One moment where the system assumed everything was fine. The escape didn't require perfection. It required a head start. That's something most people misunderstand about risk. You don't need certainty. You need margin. And those fake heads created margin. By the time guards realized something was wrong, the important part was already over. The real escape happened before they ever touched the water. By the time the men reached the roof, the escape had already succeeded. Whether they survived or not is almost secondary, because at that point, Alcatraz had already lost. Its reputation was broken. Its core promise, no one gets out, was no longer true. And once a system loses its core promise, everything after that becomes cleanup, not prevention. The raft wasn't the escape. The patience was. The water wasn't the biggest risk. The unknown was. People obsess over the cold water. But cold water can be planned for. What couldn't be planned for was chaos. Currents shift. Wind changes. Adrenaline lies. The men didn't know where they would land. They only knew where they wouldn't back in their cells. And that tells us something important. At some point, every long-term plan reaches a moment where information runs out and action begins. That moment separates thinkers from doers. Why the evidence tells two stories at once. The personal items found in the water tell a tragic story if you assume they fell in accidentally, but they tell a different story if you assume intention. Sometimes survival means shedding weight. Sometimes it means leaving behind the past, literally. Photos, addresses, letters. Those items matter emotionally, but not practically. And when survival is on the line, practicality wins. That's why this mystery hasn't closed. Because every piece of evidence fits both outcomes. Institutions hate ambiguity. Reality thrives in it. The FBI wanted certainty. They never got it. Because the escape existed in a narrow window, a space where both survival and death were possible. And institutions struggle with that. They prefer conclusions. But life doesn't offer them. The fact that no bodies were found doesn't prove survival. The fact that belongings were found doesn't prove death. This case lives in between, and that's why it still matters. The real failure wasn't security, it was confidence. Alcatraz didn't fail because it was weak. It failed because it believed it was strong. Confidence creates shortcuts. Reputation creates complacency, and complacency invites patience. The men didn't overpower the prison. They outlasted it. What this escape teaches us beyond prison walls. This story isn't really about crime. It's about systems. Any system that stops questioning itself becomes vulnerable. Any system that relies on reputation instead of review invites exploitation. And any system that assumes people will give up eventually misunderstands human persistence, especially when persistence has nothing left to lose. So, did they survive? Maybe, maybe not. But here's what we do know. They proved the impossible wasn't. They exposed cracks no one wanted to see. And they forced the world to admit something uncomfortable. No system is unbreakable, only unchallenged. Final thought, Alcatraz shut down less than a year after the escape. Not because of the water, not because of the raft, but because belief died. And once belief is gone, walls are just walls. So the real mystery isn't whether 3 men lived or died. The real mystery is this. How many systems today are still standing? Only because no one has waited long enough to test them?